Hello. Just a moment, please. Hello, and welcome to week 2 of Reverend Matt's Monster Science. Thanks for joining me again. A few little pieces of paperwork before we begin. This is the second time. I'm doing them weekly for now. We'll discuss how that's going to go in the future. But for now, we're going to go with a weekly thing, possibly Saturdays, possibly another day. We'll talk about that at the end. And speaking of talking about that at the end, I have discovered that I can't really see your comments in the chat room as I go. I'll be able to see them at the end during the Q&A, but as we go, I'm not able to see them. So if you have anything that you need me to know, then save it for the end. And if anything goes horribly wrong and you have my phone number, please give me a call because I do have my phone on me. Let's see. You can go down, you can scroll down to just beneath the screen, I believe, for the donation button, and that would be lovely. I'm also on Venmo as Matthew Kesson. It's not necessary. I'm just doing this because it's a hard time, and things will become more formalized once life goes back to normal. But while life is not normal, if you'd like to donate, please do, and if you don't, that's fine. So thank you very much, and let's begin. Hi, I'm Reverend Matt, and today we're going to discuss the far realms of cryptozoology. We will begin with a simple definition of terms. Cryptozoology is a word that means the study of hidden animals. It was popularized, the word, in the 1950s by Bernard Heuvelmans, a Belgian-French scientist widely regarded as the founder of the discipline. The coinage of this term has no bearing on our subject for tonight, none whatsoever, but it is facts like this that make me sound authoritative, like I've really done my research, and I sure hope it worked, because a lot of what I'm going to tell you tonight is going to sound like I'm making it up on the fly and, frankly, not trying very hard. In any case, what this impressive-sounding science word means in the practical world is the study of animals that people report sightings of, but that are not accepted as real by science. The ones most people have heard of would be Bigfoot, the Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster, the Noid. You remember the Noid? Who doesn't remember the Noid? Even if you're too young, it's in your genetic memory. And a few others like that. These are mostly a laughing stock, of course, a lot of absurd nonsense believed in by the gullible, like Donald Trump serves people fast food and that means he's just like us. Cryptozoology is easy to make fun of, and that's certainly why we're going to do it tonight. It's easy. But before we proceed, I do want to say something in its defense. Due to my hard-won status as one of the Twin Cities metro area's top 10 monster comedians, I have in fact become a person to whom people bring their own Bigfoot and other such sightings. Usually in confidence, they want me to help them make sense out of what they regard as an extraordinary experience that they've had. To lend my expertise, and I am routinely impressed by their sincerity, by their genuineness. I have met a number of people who I believe honestly feel that they have seen a real Bigfoot, not mistaken something else for a Bigfoot, seen it clearly and plainly. But personal genuineness is not reproducible results. It's not science, and the science for Bigfoot is really not very good. There does not exist a scientific reason to believe that a huge, exciting animal has lived in the United States of America undetected until the present, especially after at least 10 years of every single person in the free West carrying a video camera on them at all times. How, then, do I reconcile this sincerity of the people who report the sightings with my belief that it's not a real thing? Frankly, I don't. Bigfoot doesn't appear to be an animal, but it does appear to be something. I've been working on a hypothesis to do with visionary experience, and I don't know what that is. Many people take this problem and propose that Bigfoot is from outer space or from another dimension like Howard the Duck, and these, of course, are fine writing prompts for a junior high science fiction writing club, and they are also untestable hypotheses, solving the Bigfoot problem by making it into a much bigger problem indeed. So, Tonight, we're going to hear some weird things. We're going to hear some things that are super dumb. But let us try to remember, nevertheless, that they were at least sometimes things that people believed actually happened to them, and whose lives cannot be said to have been improved by the experience. Also, let us remember that there are very intelligent people who do not share my opinion that Bigfoot, for example, is not a real animal, and that their opinions may have merit, even though I am taller than virtually all of them. There are a number of people who approach cryptozoology as a legitimate branch of the biological sciences. Not an enormous number of them, but a number. For some years, there was a group called the International Society of Cryptozoology. They published a boring looking scholarly journal full of charts and numbers in the fine science tradition. I was a member of it because I paid them money. It faded away and was replaced for a while by the British Columbia Scientific Cryptozoology Society. And I'd like to say two things about that name. First of all, British Columbia was in fact a fine place to headquarter the world's premier cryptozoology organization because it is rife with major cryptids. It's prime Bigfoot country. Its Lake Okanagan features the major lake monster Ogopogo, and off Vancouver may be found Cadborosaurus, seen here in a juvenile specimen retrieved from the stomach of a sperm whale. Because if there's one thing that we know about the digestive system is that it preserves everything that goes into it untouched and unaltered. Secondly, scientific cryptozoology. You'd think that was redundant. I mean, there's ology right there in the second word. It's already scientific. We're talking about what sort of ape Bigfoot is and plesiosaur survival in Scotland. We're fine. Well, you'd think so, or if you'd ever seen What Humans Are Like, no, you wouldn't. For every person soberly proposing that the Yeti is a surviving Pleistocene Gigantopithecus, there are a whole slew of people proposing sightings of creatures that not only never existed, but couldn't possibly exist, at least not without completely rewriting everything that is known about evolution, ecology, physics, let's say flower arranging. And it is these latter creatures that we will be discussing tonight, and which the Canadian Society wished to distance themselves from by pointedly including the word scientific in their title. The scientific cryptozoologists have themselves an upward climb, and I have nothing but respect for it. It is regrettable that cryptozoology truly does attract a number of people with somewhat lackluster critical thinking skills, and indeed people who believe that science's lack of acceptance of cryptozoology is all because science is mean and dumb. So hopefully those people don't go to the doctor or drive cars. Indeed, the anti-science thread in cryptozoology has of late attracted the creationists to it, who collect sightings of dinosaurs as evidence that the Earth is 6,000 years old, in much the same way that bratwurst is evidence of skydiving. But if we start going into the logical holes in creationism, we'll be here all night or until we take our own lives, whichever comes first. But deeper than any idiotic social trends, the scientific cryptozoologists have to contend with cryptozoology's inherently folkloric quality. Ancient dragons weren't the six-limbed fire breathers we know of today, but in the old stories, immense serpents that often lived in the ocean. Bigfoot and the Yeti are wild men of the woods, a near universal legend. And though it might possibly be proper to think of them in terms of real hominid evolution, it is probably best not to ignore the symbolic purpose that they so easily serve. And so it is with the weirder cryptozoology, though these symbols are not always clear. Take, for example, a Bigfoot variant, the New Delhi Monkey Man. In 2001, reports began circulating in New Delhi of a monkey man 4 to 8 feet tall, with metal claws, glowing red eyes, maybe a helmet, and who would leap out of nowhere to rake you harmlessly with its claws. It was dismissed as mass hysteria, and, rightly so. But it has odd similarities to other incidents of threatening but basically harmless entities. The famous Victorian spring-heeled Jack was a man or demon who leaped powerfully about, wearing a helmet and a tight oilskin garment. He would come up upon young women, tear their clothing with his metal claws, and then leap away. His work here done, I guess. In the 1940s, Mattoon, Illinois, was troubled by the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, so named to distinguish him from the rational, measured Gasser of Mattoon, who allegedly ran around town pumping gas into people's houses that caused vomiting or temporary partial paralysis. No evidence of any of this was ever gathered, but sometimes a community will be gripped by nameless fear, it seems, and seek to give that fear a name, and also metal claws and maybe gas. Not all of these mass hysteria entities are so vague and inscrutable, however. The East African Popobawas are bat-winged cyclopses that sexually assault people at night and tell them they're going to come back and do it again unless the victim tells everybody about the Popobawa's visit. So they do, and you know what? We're just going to stop talking about Popobawas. Getting back to the beast folk. So, one time in 1879, in Shropshire, England, a jet-black chimpanzee with evil, glowing white eyes jumped on some dude's cart horse, and said dude tried to get it off with a whip, and the whip passed right through it. 120 years later, noted cryptozoologist and utter lunatic Nick Redfern wrote a book about getting to the bottom of this. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Because when a single long-dead person has reported an intangible chimpanzee, which is, of course, the name of my signature fragrance, maybe even Batman-esque or Sherlock Holmes-esque detective work might not tie all that up. In America in the 20th century, vehicles were instead importuned by more standard Bigfoot-type creatures who would specifically go after vehicles in which teenagers were parked in out-of-the-way places late at night to do Bible study. These passionate and decent youths would be set upon by Bigfoots or escaped serial killers or stuff like that, who would bang on the exterior of the car or jump on top of it or try to force their way in or other scary things like that. Because if there's one thing that teenage sexuality leads to, they weren't really doing Bible study. It's terrifying supernatural punishment by undiscovered simians or sometimes goalies. In Beltsville, Maryland, they had a specific regional variant of this, the Goat Man, seen here attempting to evade the paparazzi. A satyr-like creature, sometimes goat-headed, he had an origin story and everything. A scientist working on goats, a goat scientist, was transformed into a goat man, which would usually lead to fights with Spider-Man, but in this regrettably Spider-Man-free world in which we live, he instead did what anyone would do in that situation, which is, of course, attack cars with an axe. Seriously, that's the story we are meant to believe, or one of them. The American education system, it's not overfunded. Closer to home, we have the Michigan Dogman and the Beast of Bray Road in Wisconsin, which appear like hairy humanoids with dogs' heads, or simply as dogs standing comfortably on their hind legs. You can see the one in this picture because they circled it. They seem to be unconcerned with what teenagers are doing with their evenings, or even with clawing at people ineffectively, but instead exhibit more modern, standard Bigfoot-like behavior, which is to say, being seen and then running off. Some people believe them to be werewolves, but I believe this does not go far enough, and that they are in fact werewolf ninja sorcerers. Others have proposed that they represent canines' evolving human stance in order to blend in with humans. And here's the bad news, that's not going to work. And it has to work for the evolutionary explanation to be a good one. Evolution works by random mutations becoming beneficial, but they have to prove beneficial. Evolution is a process of trial and error, and it doesn't have ambitions. It would take a dizzying number of biophysical modifications for dogs to run on their hind legs, and there just isn't any reason for it. Of course, not all man-beasts are mammals. 32 years ago, on June 29th, 1988 to be precise, a young man named Chris Davis stopped on his way home from work in the wee small hours of the morning to change a flat tire in his car. Just as he finished up, he was approached by something. It was humanoid, 7 feet tall, green and wet and scaly, with glowing red eyes and 3 fingers on each hand. Well, I'm sure Chris Davis was a good guy, but apparently he judged people based entirely on their appearance. So he got into his car and was soon driving off at 35 miles per hour. Well, the green entity was untroubled by such speeds and caught up to him and leapt on top of the car and clawed at it. Davis shook it off soon enough and reported the incident to the local sheriff, because who else are you going to report it to, really? I was like 14 years old and 1,000 miles away. And so began the saga of the Bishopville Lizard Man. The Lizard Man was said to reside in Scape or Swamp, as fine a place as any for a monster to hide, and its name a shortening of Escaped Horror Swamp. There are a variety of different stories from a variety of different times about how the swamp came to get this name, all of them involving escaped horrors. Escaped. And there are those who say the lizard person itself is this runaway prostitute, mutated and granted centuries of life by mysterious forces. It's as good as an explanation as any. No, it isn't. In fact, it is a much worse explanation than most. So, let's look at some of the other explanations then. One, of course, that it is just what it sounds like, a reptilian that has evolved a humanoid form. The main problem with this idea is that it is completely wrong, just as wrong as you might chance upon, and this is mostly a matter of evolution and biophysics. Yes, that's right, biophysics. Everybody calm down. The thing about the upright bipedal form that we all enjoy so well is that it has evolved exactly once in hundreds of millions of years of vertebrate history. And this is in part because it is not a majestically efficient body plan. It's bad for the back, it's terrible for the birth canal or egg canal, and it is probably only going to evolve from an animal that is already tailless. If you've already got a nice long reptilian tail and bipedalism becomes advantageous to you to free the front limbs for grasping, to aid in running, and so on, you're just going to evolve a heavier tail as a counterbalance and end up looking like a dinosaur. And if the Bishopville Lizard Man looked like a dinosaur, well, then we'd have a different set of problems. And a different set of awesome. Some attempt to get around this by stating that the lizard man is a reptoid or reptilian or some other exciting title, these being, of course, a race of humanoid reptilians from space that live underground and take human form and have been running our governments in secret since time immemorial. Obviously sensible enough, especially since last Thanksgiving when Mike Pence distended his jaw to swallow a whole turkey. But we are going to disallow it as well. It does, I fear, have some biophysical and even political problems, and then, even then, to take the Bishopville Lizard Man and make him one of them proposes that an individual reptoid had some sort of lost weekend, and though we have all done things that we regret involving leaping onto cars in the middle of the night, it seems implausible that so tight a control as the reptoids would have would allow for such a lapse. Another major hypothesis as to the identity of the lizard man is that it is a hoax, a fabrication, either that the people reporting it are lying or deluded, or particularly popular in the lizard man's case, that someone dressed up as the lizard man to scare people away from their farm. And they would have gotten away with it too, say it with me, if not for those meddling kids. Now, such claims prove nothing, really. Claiming that you have pulled off a hoax makes you seem clever, whereas claiming that you have seen a lizard man makes you seem less so. There's actually better reason to lie about the former. But then on the other hand, hoaxing has been proven to exist, whereas lizard men, not so much. There were only ever a few sightings of the Bishopville Lizard Man, and in fact there are no other cryptozoological lizard men. In 1972, in Thetis Lake, British Columbia, some kids reported seeing a monster that so closely resembled the creature from the Black Lagoon that a Google image search for that monster mostly consists of just pictures from that movie. The monster was never seen again, but has remained in the cryptozoological literature despite this, and in spite of it being ridiculously impossible. And since 1955, people in Loveland, Ohio have sometimes reported sightings of frogmen, sometimes alone or sometimes in groups, living in the Ohio River. It is not recorded whether any of them produce any variety shows or whether there are any pig women in the vicinity with whom they might breed. Not all cryptozoology about weird humanoids, though, has them as beast people. One recent one, the rake, seen here in this fake but awesome picture, is one of those modern creatures whose proponents couldn't successfully compose a second-grade book report. I'd love to tell you some things about the rake, but there are no things to tell you. All of the existing information is impenetrable gibberish. About Slender Man, we know rather more. He's basically like a man in a black suit, only his skin is pale and he has no face whatsoever, and he is very tall and very thin. A lot of the time he has black tentacles coming out of his back, and is also often able to extend and elasticize his arms and legs until they are essentially tentacles themselves. He has a variety of supernatural powers besides, which vary with the telling. Oftentimes he can teleport, which is called in the lore slender walking. Oftentimes he can turn invisible, called slender visibility. Okay, no, it's not. But slender walking is in there, as is slender sickness, which is an affliction he induces that leads to coughing fits or, alternately, paranoia, nightmares, hallucinations, and nosebleeds. There's no slender mobile, but there is now, which is actually completely how this works. I just made up a Slendermobile, and now there's a Slendermobile. This is how everything else has occurred here. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this gaunt, faceless, tentacled entity uses these supernatural powers to render assistance to just as many kittens as possible. It is with the greatest regret that I must inform you that you are incorrect. Instead, the Slender Man pursues people and kills them. At first, he would impale them on trees or take out all their organs, put them in plastic bags, and put them back inside the body like you do. He would also sometimes simply teleport away with his victims who would never be seen again. This would become more prevalent as the stories went on. In the beginning of his mythology, he was a boogeyman, targeting children, though he has gone after more adults since then, particularly those who have had some sort of tragic history already. Now, we've made a lot of reference here to the changes through which Slender Man has gone, and he has a rich and varied history reaching all the way back to June 10th, 2009. Now, obviously, records from this time are spotty, and of course, there is nobody currently alive who remembers this period, but certain things may be determined. The Slender Man was invented on the forums for the comedy website Something Awful as part of a challenge to create fake paranormal photographs. The user Victor Surge, real name Eric Knudsen, produced 2 of these here and here, along with accompanying text describing a mysterious child-threatening entity. And that was the beginning. Now, in spite of the fact that the made-up quality of all of this is a matter of public record, in fact, all that exists of Slender Man is specifically in the form of fiction in the public record, it has nevertheless inevitably come to pass that people have come to believe in Slender Man. A question to Yahoo Answers, labeled "Who is Slender Man? Please help quickly," reads, "My little 8-year-old cousin heard about him at school when her friend showed him a YouTube video about him, and she is crying. How can I get her to stop crying?" Leaving aside the mystery of the cousin's very speedy gender switch, some people aren't good with children. But other people are worse still. The best answer gives an account of the Slender Man, which includes the idea of it being of pre-2009 pedigree, and concludes with, "Hope this helped, and don't dismiss this as fake because he could be real." Okay, first of all, no, he couldn't. No way at all. Boba Fett is more real than Slender Man. And secondly, don't dismiss this as a fake because he could be real. Should I say this to the crying 8-year-old word for word, or is it okay if I paraphrase? Regardless of the childcare implications, however, it certainly seems that the Slender Man as an idea, with its wide popularity and its ability to make people believe he exists, even though that's stupid, is an idea that works. He's not a beast person, as most of the humanoids are, and lacks their primal and potent combination of the human and the bestial, but he nevertheless plays off of a lot of very basic primal human fears. His paleness and gauntness are reminiscent of death, of course, and his usual habitation of the woods associates him with the dark and unknown wild. Juxtaposed against that is the suit, which works with the great height to create an association with authority, the height in particular implying parental authority, and though authority is often comforting to many people, twist it just a little bit, and it becomes the most terrifying thing in the world. And the moral of that is, tall people in suits are fearsome, and you should give them whatever they want. The facelessness is also a big deal. The first thing that a human baby learns to recognize by sight is the eyes of its family, followed by their faces, followed by the rest of their bodies. And then after that, platypuses and fire hydrants and Matthew McConaughey and so forth. The human face is hardwired into our brains as a matter of paramount importance, and so to present a human without one is an upsetting of the natural order that affects us on a deep and primal level. The initial the initial doctored photos deserve a good deal of credit for the popularity of the figure as well. They're really quintessential monster photos, mostly about normalcy, even innocence, but with something horrifying and unexplained lurking mysteriously and almost unnoticeably in the background. You can see him plainly, even study him a little bit, but you still don't know what he is, and boy, it doesn't seem good. That's monstrousness, the familiar rearranged into the unknown and then placed outside of the everyday, outside looking in. Finally, there's tentacles. Tentacles are creepy. But of course, the Grandmaster of weird humanoid monsters is Mothman. Now, Mothman was an entity seen in the area of Point Pleasant, West Virginia from November 12th, 1966 to December 15th, 1967. The archetypal sighting would go something like this. A group of teenagers would be driving along a country road. Whether or not they were thinking impure thoughts is not discussed. But really, what are the odds? They come upon a gray-colored humanoid figure in the road. They stop and it turns to face them, revealing two huge, red, glowing, terrifying eyes between its headless shoulders. The kids are overcome with horror and turn the car to flee. Mothman spreads its wings and lifts straight into the air, never flapping its wings. It pursues the car from above, making a squeaking sound, of all things, until the car nears civilization, at which point it veers off. Nice. Now, of course, not all sightings would be this lurid. Sometimes Mothman would be just vaguely flying around. What's especially remarkable is how this creature, unlike most of what we've discussed so far, plays off very few standard human fears. Headlessness is scary. People are supposed to have heads, and red glowing eyes are scary also because of brake lights. Look, I don't know. Nothing in nature really has red glowing eyes, but here we are nevertheless. In spite of the name, the wings are never actually described as moth-like, or like anything, really. Maybe they were like 747's wings, which sounds weird, but then he also makes a squeaking sound, so really all bets are off. In fact, it is generally held that Mothman is just a somewhat random play-off of Batman, who had a major TV show debuting that year. And if I'd been alive then, I would have headed straight to Point Pleasant just out of the implication that Julie Newmar might be somehow involved. So, not really a moth, not really anything. And that, in the end, is how Mothman is so effective. He's surreal, purely bizarre. It's better that he's gray instead of black and that he squeaks rather than roars or screams. It gives him the terror of being outside of expectations and reality. An idea that the writer John Keel really ran with. In 1975, he published the book The Mothman Prophecies, which is primarily responsible for popularizing this monster. And to hear him tell it, the surrealism of Mothman wasn't half of what was going on in Point Pleasant around that time. And may I just add, naming your sleepy rural town Point Pleasant is essentially demanding that it be visited by supernatural manifestations and or murder clowns. Keel told a story loaded with Mothmen and UFOs and men in black, the old scary kind. People were waking up in the middle of the night by disembodied voices shouting random numbers. This was serious, for a certain value, serious. A huge man with a disturbing grin started lurking around the area. Indrid Cold, he called himself. He said he was from the planet Lanulos, and that, quote, I sleep, breathe, and bleed even as you do, unquote. Oh, thanks. That is a super reassuring thing to just say out loud to someone. And so on. You couldn't swing a dead cat in Point Pleasant without hitting an inexplicable preternatural phenomenon. This all finally ended with the collapse of the local Silver Bridge, which many believe Mothman somehow caused or prophesized. It is taken as evidence of this that Mothman sightings ended after this, though it has also been argued that maybe this is actually because the local press now had better things to think about. Official investigations in 1971 determined that the collapse was caused by stress corrosion cracking in an eye bar in a suspension chain of the bridge, which of course is just what Mothman would have wanted you to think. Keel thought that all of this was to do with the breakdown of reality itself, with other dimensions intruding upon our own in the great anti-solution mentioned earlier. This is wrong, and it's a bad idea, but no one's got a better one, really. Mass hysteria, perhaps, but even the tried and true cryptozoology skeptic handwave of the creature being a misidentified, mundane animal falls apart here. One popular explanation is that it was a sandhill crane, and though unlike demonstrable alternate dimensions, sandhill cranes are real, this is somehow an even worse explanation than Keel's. At this point, maybe someone just misidentified an empty beer can. And so beyond the surrealism of its features, we have an entity with no taxonomy or origin story, a perfect storm of weirdness. The Point Pleasant Mothman is the default model, but there are relations. In Cornwall, in 1976 onward, there would be talk of the Owl Man, first seen by some little girls outside a church. Owlman is another gray, winged, red-eyed, spooky humanoid. Unlike his even more bizarro cousin, however, he operates with benefit of a head, furnished with a gaping mouth and two small horns. His feet are simple pincers. Still weird. Near La Junta Guerrero on March 6, 2009, was reported a Mothman-like entity. Chasing a car like classic Mothman, this humanoid has a fur-covered face, tiny arms, and 4 bat wings, large in front, small in back, which doesn't make any sense on an upright torso, but I have made something up. Yes, apparently we live in a world where nobody at all had drawn this magnificent nonsense and put it up on the internet. So I had to. No one is more disappointed than I am. There were even a few dozen Mothman sightings over Chicago just in 2017. It differed from the Point Pleasant Mothman in that only 2 of its sightings described it as gray, with at least 10 calling it solid black. It was also only said to squeal, as the West Virginia Mothman does, in 2 sightings, and fly without flapping its wings in 1. But the rest was quite consistent. There are a couple of other winged humanoids in the canon, not many, but they're all memorable. And by the way, the biophysics of flight are clear that if you slap wings on an otherwise humanoid shape, you still don't have something that can effectively fly, especially if those wings are less than 20 feet in span. Aerodynamics, takeoff capability, muscle attachment, all completely wrong. And it's like the joyriding teenagers aren't even paying attention to this. Millennials and the biophysics of powered flight, am I right? I had my life in order when I was that age. But getting back to flying humanoids, in 1880, the New York Times reported the sighting of a man with bat wings and improved frog's legs. I do not know what that means. Flying over Coney Island. He, quote, wore a cruel and determined expression, unquote. Of course he did. Delightful. Delightful. One night in 1969, outside of Da Nang in Vietnam, 3 American GIs saw a woman fly by. She was naked but covered in black fuzz, though she still emitted a pale glow. Her arms were bat wings that flapped in an undulating, boneless way. That war, it did things to people. To be fair, not usually this thing specifically. On April 16th, 1994, near Lake Caposin, Washington, somebody saw a 9-foot blue-furred humanoid with a wolf's head and bat wings, later dubbed Bat Squatch. And if you're going to be wrong about animals, this is the way to do it. Bat Squatch is a huge, furry humanoid, hence the squatch, though the wolf's head, the bat wings, and the blue would put it in rather a different taxonomic class. Sasquatch, a primate, and Bat Squatch, some made-up nonsense. Still, we see here how the standard, more animal cryptids can have relations on the fringes. Sea serpents and lake monsters are normally held to be prehistoric lake monsters, and there are terrible, terrible problems with this, but at least those are animals. There are other explanations as well. Giant eels, or long-necked seals, or long-necked manatees, which I am not making up as an explanation, and which is adorable, and also insane. Some of these water monsters, however, would not submit to something even so mundane as a long-necked manatee explanation. Muskrat Lake in Ontario apparently houses Hapixalor, which has an alligator head and a mane and 3 eyes, and is called Hapixalor, and is probably not real. But that's okay. Not everything that makes the world better has to be real. Off Cape San Martin, California, lurks Bobo, a sea monster with a gorilla's head. Fun fact, or at least fact, my extraordinary illustrator here, Mr. Andy Vang, added ray fins to Bobo because a simple serpent with an ape's head offended his obviously advanced sense of marine animal anatomy. Amazing. In Monterey Bay, California, there may be found the Old Man of Monterey Bay, a 50-foot monster with a head variously described as that of a duck, giraffe, crocodile, snake, horse, bull, monkey, man, or elephant. One of those. Hard to say. I said he may be found in Monterey Bay. Also, maybe not. And off Chile, there lives the Camohueto, a unicorn mercow that digs holes with its horn and eats people. I don't have anything to add to that. So these are not plesiosaurs. They're not, and no one would be happier if this was what plesiosaurs were like than I would be, but alas, it is not so. And indeed, dinosaurs in general are another cryptozoological category that tends to get weird. Now, living dinosaurs aren't a particularly strong category in the first place, science-wise. Cryptozoologists of the more credulous stripe like to mention that the fossil record is very incomplete, and it is. New discoveries are constantly being made. But one thing that the fossil record does have is dinosaurs, 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 and then suddenly no dinosaurs at all, apart from birds, and that was 65 million years ago. And you know, when you're waiting at the doctor's office, 65 million years is even longer than that. And that means something. The fossil record is incomplete, but it's not actual garbage. So the survival of non-avian dinosaurs is not a strong idea. But again, at least it's one about animals. Some of the dinosaur cryptozoology does go beyond that. In 1908, the French journal Je sais tout reported that some travelers in the Yukon had encountered a 50-foot-long Ceratosaurus, a kind of predatory theropod with a horn on its nose, covered in gray-black hair. And of course, real ceratosauruses were nowhere near so large and were likely not covered in hair, but that's the genius of it. Surely after 65 million years, the dinosaur survivals would have evolved new forms, perhaps growing larger and hairier, and perhaps evolving into only being seen once ever in the Yukon. Okay, moving on. Surviving pterosaurs are a popular bit of cryptozoology because what could more plausibly evade our detection than something enormous that lives in the sky? Again, because these were animals, I will not go too much into them here, save for a few specific iterations. On February 9th, 1859, the Illustrated London News reported that 3 years prior in Coulmont, Haute-Marne, France, workmen were cutting a railway tunnel had uncovered, emerging from a cavity in a stone, a pterosaur. It had black, oily skin, a 10-foot wingspan, and had pretty much immediately let out a shriek and died. The Illustrated London News was lying. This was actually a thing that newspapers would do in those days, and may be responsible for such things as the hairy ceratosaur and the scowling man flying over Coney Island. They would publish deliberate but completely absurd lies as truth to entertain and amuse, as opposed to now, when the news media publishes deliberate but completely absurd lies produced by our elected officials. Also newspapery is the Thunderbird photo. Supposedly on April 26, 1890, the edition of the Tombstone, Arizona newspaper, The Epitaph, I get it, there was published a photo of a huge animal, wings outstretched, with its triumphant killers for scale. Many claim to have seen a copy of the photo in a book, but no one can produce such a book, or the original newspaper. Also, in describing it, some tell of a bird and some of a pterosaur, the animal nailed up to a barn wall, or held up, or lying on the ground, and so on. Alas, this isn't it. This is a hoax. I am truly sorry. Also newspapery is the no, that was the last paragraph. In 1976, there was a spate of sightings in Texas of a large, leathery-winged, monkey-faced animal that was described as a pterosaur by researchers, and by witnesses later shown pictures of pterosaurs. Never mind that a monkey's head looks as much like a pterosaur's as does, say, a stack of delicious buttermilk pancakes. Never mind that. And from Papua New Guinea hails the dua, a surviving pterosaur like any other. I mean, yawn, only in this case, bioluminescent, which is what people in the fashion industry refer to as a lot of look. I suppose it's felt that if we're buying surviving pterosaurs, we'll probably buy a lot more besides. It's a pterosaur that's bioluminescent and shoots missiles out of its nostrils. Maybe it's a tennis pro, I don't know. And this brings us to the Jersey Devil, somewhat randomly and abruptly. Now, the Jersey Devil, according to legend, was born in 1735, when a one Deborah Leeds was about to give birth to her 12th child or her 13th, depending on the story, which is understandable enough. I would assume that once you've had like 8 children, you just sort of start losing count. Well, Mother Leeds, as she was called, in reference to her motherhood, an unfair de-emphasizing of her own interests and pursuits as a human being. But then, on the other hand, she did have at least 11 children. She was tired of all these children to whom she was just constantly giving birth, and declared that this new one could be a devil for all she cared. And so, of course, it was. Not a lot of people became obstetricians in those days because birthing could get super messed up. Anyway, the young devil killed the midwife and also maybe the other children, or just everybody in the house, and then flew up the chimney to go live in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. Insert joke about how New Jersey is terrible here. The real-world origin of the Jersey Devil, which is to say the origin of the legend, may actually be even stranger than this. It seems there was an almanac publisher named Daniel Leeds in the colonies in the late 1600s who published astrology, which made him enemies of the powerful local Quakers. And so weird religious people, later known for oaks, fought with astrologers, and I feel like this did set the stage for what America has since become. Leeds was also a supporter of the crown, which made him few friends as well. I would say something here about how we could maybe stand to be ruled by England again these days, but things are falling apart over there pretty amazingly as well, as if the whole English-speaking world has an expiration date. I don't know what's going to happen in most of Canada, but at least it will be very polite. Anyway, in 1716, Daniel's almanac was inherited by his son, Titan Leeds, Titan, who put the family crest on the almanac, which featured wyverns, which was unpopular because family crests were all about royalism. His almanac also became a rival to Benjamin Franklin's, and that inventor, statesman, and lunatic once published a piece lampooning astrology and predicting the death of Titan. Titan. Well, after the predicted death date, Titan declared himself not dead, whereupon Franklin declared that no, he was, and he was now an almanac publishing ghost. And this became a general joke about him, and it is thought by some that the already widely reviled Leeds, now a supernatural entity associated with two-legged winged dragons, became the Jersey Devil, which was indeed called the Leeds Devil until 1909. We'll get to that, though. That's foreshadowing, a classic literary technique. Please consider that in your grading. Anyway, basically, there's a Jersey Devil because Quakers didn't like astrology. The Jersey Devil looks more or less like this. Horse-headed and horned, bipedal and six-limbed, two of those limbs being wings. He's hooved and has a long tail, sometimes spiky. He's 4 to 8 feet tall and sometimes glows and sometimes breathes fire, and people have been having sightings of him for about 200 years, and it is, of course, difficult to say what it is they're actually seeing. Once again, an explanation that has been put forth is that they're seeing sandhill cranes, and I feel like a lot of people see sandhill cranes and do not mistake them for terrifying supernatural experiences, but perhaps I am being optimistic. It doesn't help that the standard Jersey Devil is just one description. Sometimes it's reptilian, sometimes it's a hairy humanoid. Basically, if it's weird and in New Jersey, it's the Jersey Devil. And it was never weirder and more in New Jersey than in between January 16th and 23rd, 1909, when suddenly people started seeing the devil all over the place, flying in the sky and lurking near chicken coops and leaving tracks on the roofs of houses that people found when they went up on the roofs of their houses, and just generally causing pandemonium. Schools were closed for fear of the Jersey Devil. Authority figures were photographed putting up extremely reassuring signs, and then in 8 days it was all over as quickly and inexplicably as it had begun. But it had caught the attention of the national news media, whereupon it was dubbed for the first time the Jersey Devil. It was satisfying to wait, wasn't it? So, mass hysteria then, as we have seen before. It happens again and again, and the fun thing about it is that it is something of an unexplained phenomenon itself. Its origins and its transmission are poorly understood by psychological science. There are those, therefore, who argue that this is no better an explanation than the actual reality of a horse-headed, fire-breathing monster. Those people are weirdos. The Jersey Devil has since lent its name to the New Jersey National Hockey League team, the New Jersey Devils. One of their advertising slogans for a time, and I'm not making this up, was "Join the Devil's Army." It was on billboards, on bus shelter ads, the whole bit. I'm sorry, it's just so beautiful. Now, as a fire-breathing demonic entity, the Jersey Devil hews more closely to classical monster making than many of the things we're here discussing. And such classical monsters do crop up in modern days from time to time. In 1984 and 1985, 2 different people saw a dog with a beak and wings flying over London, which would be dubbed the Brentford Griffin. These 2 people turned out to be friends of one another, which is a remarkable coincidence, don't you think? One time in Melbourne, Florida, somebody witnessed a centaur, which took them on a journey full of mythical figures and self-discovery. Well, no, it didn't do that. But if you're telling people you saw a centaur, I don't know why you wouldn't just go for it, story-wise. Anyway, here's Guy Fieri as a centaur. There are other newer combined animals, of course, not six-limbed vertebrates like the last few, but rather other ways we are meant to imagine evolution really rolling up its sleeves and saying, you know what, let's just throw out every single thing about how I work. There's the Tatzelworm, reported by otherwise reasonable people, maybe, in the Alps. It's a cat in front and a snake behind. Here's one attacking a pig that has apparently decided to just bear down and try to get through this. In the background, a swineherd poses dramatically, attempting to steal focus and failing because in the middle is a cat snake. A black, tailless dog with the head and neck of a red-eyed serpent ran out in front of a car in Magalia, California in 1996, causing the car to swerve into a canyon, which is a pretty good reason to swerve into a canyon. Also, I should again emphasize that probably no, it didn't. And also, I want a snake-headed dog so badly. Around Montpelier, Vermont, may be found coonigators. And obviously, we're making fun of all this, but it is still deserving of love because sometimes it gives you a raccoon with an alligator snout for no reason that the human mind can possibly grasp. These are sometimes described as genetic hybrids of alligator and raccoon, but this, of course, is not how hybridization works. Only very closely related animals can be hybridized, and if you try to mate an alligator and a raccoon, what you in fact get are an alligator and a raccoon who have had a terrible evening. Not any sort of chimera, but worthy of mention is Jeff, the talking mongoose, whose name was spelled like this, because a talking mongoose named Jeff spelled like this would be implausible. Anyway, in the 1930s, a farm owned by the Irving family on the Isle of Man was supposedly inhabited by a talking mongoose, who claimed to be 80 years old and from New Delhi, India. He claimed at various times to be an extra clever mongoose, an earthbound spirit, and a ghost in the form of a mongoose, and once said, I'm a freak. I have hands and I have feet, and if you saw me, you'd faint. You'd be petrified, mummified, turned into stone or a pillar of salt. And talking mongoose, I'm going to need you to dial it down a shade. Various psychic investigators visited the farm. None of them saw Jeff, though many heard him. Still in all, he was widely considered to be a hoax, no doubt in part because, and I don't mean to be a buzzkill here, mongooses can't talk. Facts about mongooses, y'all. The motivation for the hoax is unknown, but then if you were living in a farmhouse in the Isle of Man and you had 80 years to wait before there was Netflix, you might make up some nonsense yourself. Invertebrates get in on the act as well. A popular Mongolian cryptid, a name for the subject of cryptozoology, is the Mongolian deathworm, or Olgoi korkoi, meaning large intestine worm. This is a 2 to 5 foot desert worm that spits venom and shoots electricity. Cryptozoologists, I know you're looking for credibility, so maybe lay off the lightning sandworms. This is actually an ongoing problem with even the most serious cryptozoology. New species of animals are in fact being discovered all the time, but they're all new kinds of forest goat or butterfly, none of them previously subjects of cryptozoology. Cryptozoology has no real successes, I'm afraid. And this is in part because even the more scientific cryptozoology types aren't looking for slight variations of existing species most of the time, but rather towering hairy man-apes and the spice must flow over here. Cryptozoology is rarely the general search for hidden animals, but the search for hidden animals so totally exciting that the idea that we're only just now getting around to paying attention to them is problematic. One time, in an oil emulsion pit used in making automobile bumpers in a GMC plant in Anderson, Indiana, they found some squid-like creatures. It was speculated by some that they had been produced by the chemical mix, which does make sense because, of course, in the unguessable gulfs of time, life on Earth itself was originally produced by an oil emulsion pit used in making automobile bumpers in a GMC plant in Anderson, Indiana. What was actually happening here, as in so many of our creatures tonight, is I don't know. And when you should happen to meet someone who does know fully and with confidence where the oil emulsion squid came from, or where Mothman came from for that matter, I would advise finding someone else to talk to. And then, of course, there's just randomness. The Charles Mill Lake Monster from Ohio is only described as hairless, armless, 7 feet tall, and with huge webbed feet and glowing green eyes. But that doesn't stop every single picture of it online from being totally cartoony. In 1973, there were a few sightings of a gray, 3-legged, 2-armed creature with huge pink eyes in Enfield, Illinois. The first sighting was at someone's front door, but nobody invited it in because hospitality is dead, apparently. Indeed, they dubbed it the Enfield Horror, even though it never even so much as menaced a single sexually active teenager or crawled out of a television set in Japan. On April 21st and 22nd, 1977, several teenagers around Dover, Delaware, reported seeing a creature with a bulbous head, huge eyes, and a spindly body, which would be dubbed the Dover Demon. It was never seen again, though of course creatures like it are seen quite frequently in the form of the alien greys. Now, the Dover Demon had no association with UFO activity, but then, of course, it has been proposed that the Greys themselves are not, in fact, aliens, but some other phenomenon. In particular, some people say they're a symbolic representation of birth memories. In the abduction narratives, one suddenly wakes up in a brightly lit room. The medical procedures often are to do with reproduction, or at least the navel where the umbilical cord once was. And greys do resemble fetuses, though admittedly fetuses don't usually hang out together, and when they do, it is very dark, making them not really a part of fetal memories. But, as mentioned previously, the first thing a baby recognizes in people is eyes, and then second, their faces, and then the rest of their bodies. And it does seem like the greys could be an embodiment of this process. So perhaps the Dover Demon is more of this. We cannot get into the UFO occupant phenomenon here, as this is a topic all its own. I do have another talk about it that I will presumably do again here in the future. We will touch on 2 entities, or sorts of entities, from the early days of the UFOs, back before everybody had really settled on to the greys and reptoids and such like. One is the Flatwoods Monster. In September of 1952, some boys in Flatwoods, West Virginia, went to investigate a meteor that had come down nearby, only to be confronted by a 15-foot-tall individual making a hissing sound, whereupon they ran for their lives, and then some of them vomited for several hours. The end. Not really a gripping narrative, a page-turner. It's a pretty scary alien, but mostly just a good PR company, I guess. The second would be the Hopkinsville Goblins from August of 1955. After a saucer landed nearby, a host of small, silvery, long-armed creatures started peering into the windows of a rural Kentucky house. The residents responded by shooting them over and over again, to no effect. I will mention that one of these residents' names was, in fact, Billy Ray. Do with this important information what you will. This is why everybody is afraid of white people, by the way. We have guns, and we think there are space goblins. The chupacabra, Spanish for goat sucker, is actually a cryptid who sort of got hijacked by the UFO people. Originally described as a mangy, coyote-sized canine creature, it would later come to be covered in spikes, and then rise up on its hind legs, and then take a gray alien head. The coyote variety was sometimes given an origin story, that of a creature created in a genetics lab, because, of course, there is a lot of grant money in creating animals that suck the blood out of goats. And as the chupacabra changed, so too did its origins. Now it came from an alien genetics lab, and thank you, that is much better. As the name implies, chupacabras live off the blood of barnyard animals, most especially goats, and I've taken the liberty of doing a bit of math. Now, goat's blood has 21 calories per ounce, and the average goat has 2.367 ounces of blood in it, and there's some trouble for my search history. This works out to 49.707 calories worth of blood in one goat, which coincidentally is the percentage of the battle knowing is, though it's usually just rounded off to half. We'll round it to 50 calories of goat's blood in a goat. Then we'll move to Kleiber's Law, which is an equation that describes how many calories an animal needs per day to survive. For a placental mammal, which we will assume this hair-covered North American animal to be, the equation looks like this. People complain to me sometimes that there isn't enough actual science in this show with science in its name. How you like me now? Also, no one has ever actually complained about that. So, if we take the chupacabra as being the size of a small coyote, about 22 pounds or 10 kilograms, the required caloric intake per day becomes 393. Divided by 50 calories of blood per goat, that means that a chupacabra would need to suck all the blood out of 7.86 goats per day. And that, my dear friends, is too many goats. And that's just to cover basic metabolic needs. It doesn't even address the problem of the energy expenditure to cover running around sucking the blood out of all those goats. If you take nothing else away from tonight, please just remember that a 22-pound placental mammal would need to drink the blood of 7.86 goats per day to maintain its metabolism. Some of you may have heard me speak about this math before. And now I've spoken about it again, because figuring out exactly how much goat a goat sucker would suck if a goat sucker would suck goats is my finest accomplishment. As weird and random as the chupacabra is, it does serve a fairly elemental purpose. It is a threat to the livelihood of farmers. It is a classic monster, an imaginary creature of real and tangible menace, or supposed tangible menace. But so many of the creatures we have looked at here are nothing of the sort. They're not actual threats to us, not monsters in the classic sense, and they do not have the mythic weight of the wild man or the serpent of the sea. They're weird little gray things on your doorstep, giant winged blue wolfmen that fly away, squid in oil pits. Monsters are always outsiders, and these the most outside of all. Indeed, that may be the center of what they are. In a world that seems to many people to be increasingly controlled, ordered, explained, perhaps these creatures represent some deep need for pure chaos, some need for the inexplicable in a scientific world. Except for the Bishopville Lizardman. That's about how lizardmen are awesome. Thank you. That's our talk for tonight. Let me switch over to Q&A mode. It will take surprisingly long. Okay, here we go. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in again. I hope you had fun. It's a big weird topic. We're gonna do the Q&A. Thank you for the claps. Thanks very much. We're gonna do the Q&A. Before we do that, Reverend Matt's Monster Science, reverendmattsmonsterscience.com. Look it up on Facebook, all the various social media. I'm doing a show on the 9th, co-produced with Norway House, where I'm talking about fairies and mythical creatures of the Scandinavian countries. And I'm once again going to recommend Sam Landman's daily 8 p.m. podcast, just not on Saturdays, obviously, and Leslie Vincent's Monday ukulele things. Now, before we get to the Q&A, I actually have a question for you guys, and you can answer me now in the thing, or you can look me up on the various social media. As we said, I'm very, we're all in our houses. It's very sad, so I'm into any input that you might have. So do look me up and tell me what you think, and just stuff in general. Ask me questions. But the question I have for right now is, I'm trying to figure out, I'm going to do this weekly. It's occurring to me that Saturday nights are actually getting really super loaded with online content, and I'm wondering if I should maybe do another day of the week. And I'm wondering if there's another day of the week that you would like, another day or time that would be particularly good for you guys. As far as this is concerned, so let me know what night of the week is best for your live streaming needs. So let me know that, and then questions. It's question time. Ask me any questions. There's a lot more information on all this weirdness than I've just said, and certainly there's a bunch of weirdness. So yes, every day is the yeah. So yeah. Questions. Ask me. Fridays seem okay, says one person. That is an impressive giant octopus that somebody has also put up. Thursday could be solid. I was kind of thinking Thursday myself, actually. Sunday evening. Okay, that's a possibility. We'll put that on the list. Can you tell me about the unicorn sea creature? It's there's not Sunday. No, I'm not going to do mornings. I love you, but I'm not going to do mornings. Yeah, I could do that. For the Kamowato. There's really not a lot. Sometimes the information that is that comes down to us is fairly simple. Sort of a cow in front and a fish behind, a mercow with a single horn, and it comes up on the ground and digs into the ground and then jumps up and attacks people because that's I mean, that's story enough, don't you think? That's plenty. Look at that. So yes. Hold on. Let me see. Slender. Okay. Question: Slender Man, is there fully a canon story with an end for him? No. It's kind of the dude made the made the photos, and then people just ran with it. So there's no. The photos are the closest thing to canon. After that, everything is just more more nonsense. What was the name of the absurdly adorable cartoony one again? Which a couple of them were absurdly adorable cartoony ones. The Enfield Horror was an absurdly adorable cartoony one. Let's see. No arms, little legs. Oh yes, that was what was that thing called? I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but I'll find it real quick here. The Charles Mill Lake Monster is the one with is the absurdly cartoony one. Yes. So yeah. Questions? More questions? Ask me more questions. Are there any monsters that you believe are real apart from humans and all that? Yeah, I get that. Okay. Any monsters that the only cryptozoology monster that I think has a shot is the Loch Ness monster, because there's this theory that it's a long story, and I've got it in another talk. So stay tuned, and you'll hear about it. But occasionally, European eels grow very, very large, and this is proven. I mean, they fished 9-foot European eels out of rivers in Europe every so often, and so you just get one that's grown especially large, and that covers it. And indeed, you get like arch skeptics saying there's no such thing as the Loch Ness monster. It's just a giant eel. To which I say, may I see this giant eel? I mean, that's not bad of a consolation prize. I mean, that's Loch Ness monster enough for me. So that's the only one that I think has an especially solid case at this point. Years ago, I'd have said different. I was bigger into sea serpents in those days, just because the sea is so huge and so unexplored. But sea serpents are almost always implicitly air-breathing animals, and marine biology does kind of have a lock on everything that surfaces to breathe, I'm afraid. So yes. Usagi asks, have you heard of the Tsuchinoko of Japan? It's a short, fat rattlesnake cryptid. I learned of it watching an adorable anime called Kimono Friends, in which there is an anthropomorphic kawaii little girl version. Yeah! Yes, I have heard of the Tsuchinoko and Tsuchinoko. My apologies. And yeah, sometimes it's supposed to be a big worm. I think there's maybe I'm confusing it with another one, but there's also supposed to be there is an actual giant salamander that lives in Japan, and there's been some implication that is a cross, that Tsuchinoko has something to do with the giant Japanese hellbender salamander. So yes, I have heard of that. I think I missed Thunderbird. I don't know if you mentioned it, but they shoot lightning every time they blink and thunderclap for each flap of their wings. I'll have to look at that later. Yeah, Thunderbird. The Thunderbird, as a word in cryptozoology, usually refers to people seeing huge, giant eagle-type birds, or it is sometimes applied to American pterosaur sightings. The actual traditional Thunderbird that shoots lightning from its eyes and causes the thunder, all that sort of thing, I don't really consider cryptozoology. People aren't reporting that and asking that it be thought of as an animal. It's more of a spiritual entity, and so I tend to classify that differently. What is in your opinion the absolute cringiest movie monster? The movie. I mean, it depends on which. The way I'm going to choose to interpret that is the actual cringiest monster movie, which is Humanoids from the Deep. The monsters themselves are design-wise no better. They're water creatures. They're creatures from the Black Lagoon, essentially, and they're fine. They're not great, but they're whatever. But it is just the rapiest movie you've ever heard in your life, and that makes me cringe quite a great deal. So that's what comes to mind there. Have you ever played any of the Witcher video games? Your thoughts on their monsters? I am not. I am. I have not tossed a coin to your Witcher. No, I don't know it. I'll have to look into it. I have a video game dinosaur show, but one of these days I have to do a larger video game show. Although of course, The Witcher was a series. It was a series of books before it was a video game. But I'm afraid I'm not as familiar with that. I apologize. Questions, comments. There we go. Well, thank you. From what I've been told by a couple of elders, they're more cryptid. They were real at one point, but let's chat more about that later. I'm taking. It's all right. No. I like it. No. You're very welcome to. These are good comments. Thank you very much. Cryptozoology is just like cryptozoology implies the effort to. Just in the name itself implies the effort to demonstrate that the creatures that it discusses are physically real to the world, to get science to accept that they are. And I haven't heard a lot of attempts to get science to accept that the thunder producing birds, but we'll discuss. That would be lovely. Let's see. Can I speak more to the cultural evolution of the chupacabra? Yeah, it started in Puerto Rico specifically, as far as anyone knows, or at least it was popularized in Puerto Rico, and then spread very, very quickly to Latin America in general, from that area, and so the southern United States and Mexico and so forth, and this is all kind of in the 90s that it started, and the evolution very quick. From there, started with the dog-like creatures, and then the spiky dog-like creatures, then the standing dog-like creatures, and then the UFO, and this is just as more and more weirdos got interested in it, and aside from the problem with needing too much goat's blood to survive, it has a problem that a great many cryptids do have, which is kind of suddenly appearing. There's not a lot of information on chupacabras prior to the 80s or 90s, and if they were an animal, then there would be, and a lot of the creatures sort of crop up out of nowhere, and that's not how animals work. Animals have have evolved some time ago, so yes. Will I be doing another D&D show? Perhaps one of these live shows. These are my personal favorite. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I have a Dungeons & Dragons show, an hour about the creatures that are specifically made for Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons has griffins and dragons and minotaurs and stuff, and they did not invent those, but Dungeons & Dragons did invent a very great many monsters, and a lot of them are wonderful, and a lot of them are unbelievable garbage, and of course everything in between. And so yes, I do have a show about that, and yeah, I'll put that on the list of things to do live here. I was watching Gremlins 2 earlier today. I thought it might be fun. Whoa. Okay, hold on. Fun for you to do a show on monster rules. Would you please get on that already? Look, Duck, I'm on it. I'm on it. I'm fine. Yeah, well, that's the thing about monster. He's referring, of course, to the famous rules that Gremlins have, which is don't feed, or that Mogwai have, which is don't feed them after midnight, don't expose them to light, don't. What was the other thing? I don't even. I know Gremlins very well. Modrons, says somebody. Yeah, don't get them wet. Don't shine light on them. Don't feed them after midnight. And rules. There are a lot. Monsters have so many rules, and it's part of the deal. A lot of the times they're these unstoppable supernatural things, and the only way you can stop them is by knowing some damn rule that undoes their power. So, frankly, the reason I don't do a monster rules show that I haven't yet is that I couldn't cram an even basic overview into an hour. So many monsters have so many rules, but it is an idea, and I will certainly keep it in mind. I generally do everything you say, as you know. And Gremlins 2 is amazing, and I don't care who says otherwise. Which cryptid that you discussed tonight is your favorite? I like the. I just like the dog with the snake head. I don't know. It's simple. It's elegant. It's a dog with a snake head. It runs out onto the road and makes people crash their cars. Doesn't make any sense at all. I'm also a terribly big fan of the Coonigator. You take a ordinary adorable mammal and put a reptile onto it somewhere, and who's got two thumbs? So yes. Have you seen any of the BuzzFeed unsolved episode of these cryptids? Mothman is especially memorable. Yeah, I don't know about BuzzFeed. Certainly the sort of History Channel and cable type stuff that people do about cryptozoology, which often discusses these sorts of monsters. Certainly the History Channel type stuff is trash, is just unwatchable garbage full of lies. So that, and then that's been going on for years and years, and that has kind of put me personally off of video documentaries about cryptozoology. They're just gibberish. So yeah. Thank you. Don't get them wet. Yes. Modrons, yells Colonel Batguano, if that is his real name. Modrons being these. Oh, Modrons are weird. They're lawful neutral in Dungeons and Dragons terms, and they're the ultimate lawful neutral beings, and so they're various perfect shapes with arms and legs. They're weird chaos, and they are in fact in the Dungeons and Dragons show. So if I do that. Wasn't the Dover monster pick hand drawn on paper too, like the one you made before? Forgot the exact creature. Well, the Dover demon, it was drawn on lined paper. That drawing was by the original witnesses. That was the original description of it. The people the kids who saw it drew that Dover demon drawing. So that's where that comes from. I drew the Mexican Mothman and the Black Shadow chimpanzee, and the excellent Andy Vang drew several of the water monsters and Bat Squatch and a few things like that. Garbage full of lies is fun. It's fun. I'm not. You know what? I'm not even. You want to watch that stuff? Be my guest. It's just not my jam. Feeds more comedic investigative dive into it. Like they have the straight man who's a non-believer and the believer. There's antics and good entertainment for fans of spooky things. Strong recommended. Very good. Speaking of lawful neutral, what is your alignment? What would you say are the alignments of the majority of the creatures tonight? All chaotic, obviously. All chaotic, mostly chaotic neutral, I would say, being of animal intelligence, or just neutral, being of animal intelligence. My own alignment would have to be chaotic good, just because I have human compassion and not a lot of respect for authority. So there we are. Anyone else? Well, thanks so much for tuning in. Absolutely. Thanks so much for tuning in. Look for me next week. I'll be posting it on all of the various media. Next, probably Saturday night one more time until I figure out what's going on. Might do Thursday. Keep an eye on my social media, and we'll get this going. So yeah. Thanks once again. Have a wonderful night, and I'll see you in a week. Thank you all so much.